Who's afraid of the new Jew? Now, what do I mean exactly by the new Jew? So basically, the new Jew is the armed Jew, the strong Jew, the Jew who's able, who's willing to defend himself, and even, God forbid, to attack when necessary. Now, this new Jew is not really new. The Bible, actually, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is full of this so-called new Jews. Jews who were fighters, who were warriors, who were very brave, very courageous. In fact, the whole notion of the Jew who's totally passive and is only into learning and is someone who is very soft and introverted, it's relatively speaking a later addition into history. But what happened was that this strong Jew, the Jew who's standing up for what he believes in, who's willing to actually fight, who's taking part in actual history making, has been away for a long, long time. And so he was forgotten. And what happened was that both Jews and non-Jews got used to not having him around. They got used to a different image of what a Jew is like, what Judaism is like, and they've grown accustomed to this. And even in a way, they fell in love with the archetype of what we call the exile Jew. The Jew who's the learner, who's the student, who's passive, who is taking everything and saying, well, it's from God, and he accepts it, and he's not willing to fight and stand up and oppose the very negative and harmful forces that are at work in the world. And it's very interesting to understand that both non-Jews and Jews have really fallen in love with this figure, this image of what Judaism is like. It's in fact a very partial image of what Judaism really is. It's an aspect of Judaism. It's a very strong aspect of Judaism. It's a very strong aspect of what it means to believe that there is an all-powerful God who's really running the show, running the world. He's doing everything, and therefore everything that is happening, including the very evil things that are happening, are in some profound way part of God's good will. They're actually a blessing in disguise, and therefore we need to not only look at the world as if it all depends on us, it all depends on our decisions, our forces, if we oppose or don't oppose reality. So the fact that Jews have had this image of being very, again, passive and submissive is coming from a very deep and very real place of faith, of emunah, that Judaism is all about. The fact that we are seeing the world, it's not only run by people, by empires, by kings. It's not just human forces at play or natural forces at play. There's also a divine narrative that's being unfolded, a divine story, and it's always hidden, and you never know who's really in control. And that is the source of this very, basically very positive kind of passivity, or this taking a side-looking sort of glance at the world, being a little bit on the outside of it, looking at the world from the side and letting things play out, and not being at the forefront of pushing and doing everything, which could be a show of unfaithfulness, of not believing that the true being pulling all the strings behind the curtain is God. And yet, all this is a very, very narrow, partial aspect of what Judaism is all about. But it has been the dominant aspect of what Judaism is. And therefore, we all fell in love with it. We got so used to it, of imagining, of even hearing the word Jew, Jewish, Judaism, and thinking about this kind of, not always, not for everyone, but for many people, again, Jews and non-Jews alike, they fell in love with this image. And again, the reason is that the strong Jew that we now call the new Jew, which is really a renovated Jew, or a Jew that's been taken out of a certain, like an historical archive and been renewed, he's been away for a long, long time. Now, how long has he been away from? So there are several sort of dates we can give. On the surface, the sort of later date we can say is the destruction of the Second Temple, right? That's late 1st century CE, 70 CE or 68, when the Second Temple was destroyed. What happened was that the Jewish rabbis accepted this fact. They realized history is changing. We don't have our kingdom anymore. We don't have our temple anymore. It was like a dead man walking for some time because the Romans were in control long before the destruction of the temple. But this was like the final blow, that the temple was destroyed, and this is considered the beginning of the long 2,000-year long exile that Jews are. To a certain degree, we're still in it because the third temple doesn't exist. And of course, there's this big debate whether the state of Israel is maybe the end of the exile. Is it or isn't it? That's part of the topic we want to talk about today. But when the Second Temple was destroyed, it was for sure the beginning of the exile. And then a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he said, in this case, we're not going to let Judaism go. We're not going to give up. He said, I prefer to be exiled from Jerusalem to Yavne, that's a different town, and I will have Yavne and its wise scholars. Tnuli et Yavne v'chachamea. And in Yavne, I will rebuild Judaism in a different mode, in a different way. It'll be a scholarly Judaism, not a Judaism of the sword, not a Judaism of ruling, not a Judaism of political power, not a Judaism of authority. It'll be a Judaism of books, of questions and answers and learning. And this was just the final phase in several phases of, like, in many ways, the final blow to political Judaism and to militant Judaism. It was out of the picture. And we're talking almost to the day, and it'll be a few decades away now, 2,000 years since this happened. Incidentally, the town that he moved to, Yavne, if you look at the Hebrew word Yavne, you can permute the letters, it creates the word Bina. Bina is the faculty of human understanding, the opposite of Chokhmah. Chokhmah is divine wisdom. And the part of the characteristics of Chokhmah, of divine wisdom, the opposite of Bina, Yavne, is that from Chokhmah comes the divine-like authority to rule, to govern, to hold a kingdom. It descends from this chokhmah. Why? Because you need to have the faith that you are holding on to an absolute divine truth, and then you can use that to govern and to rule. But if you lose this chokhmah, wisdom aspect of what Judaism is all about, and you focus mostly or almost exclusively on the binah, the understanding, human understanding aspect, that means that you've descended into this world, and now you don't have this sense of absolute divine truth backing you up so that you can use that to come to the world with a kind of authority, political authority, and so on. And so when he said, I'm going to be exiled willingly, again, accepting the fact that the Romans destroy the temple, and the Romans have the upper hand now, and will for who knows how long. Today we know that it's going to be 2,000 years. But he says, when I'm going to Yavne, again, the same letters as Bina, he says, I'm going to switch. There's going to be a big switch from the sense of holding on to an absolute truth and then using that as a way to be very forceful in the way you come to the world. And I'm going to focus on human understanding, different rabbis sitting around a table, opening the books of the Torah, asking questions, giving answers, having other answers, debating, not always reaching even answers or absolute answers. It remains this point of view or that point of view. And then that's how we became the scholarly nation that we all know. It started before, but this was in many ways the final and most significant step in all of this. Now, really, so it's the final step, but really we can give some stages before. So what was the stage before? We talked about now the destruction of the second temple, but really it started in the destruction of the first temple. What happened after the destruction of the first temple? We were exiled to Babylon, and that was when prophecy started fading away, like a sun setting, and the scholarly wisdom started growing. At that point, it was only the Mishnah, the first level of the oral Torah. And later on, when we're talking about the destruction of the second temple, the transition to Yavne, that's very soon will become the end of the Mishnah period and the beginning of the Talmudic period. That's the archetypal scholarly Jew with all the different questions and answers. The Mishnah was just the beginning of that. Already, so now going back to the earlier stage, the destruction of the first temple, once we had some Jews living in the land of Israel and other Jews living in Babylon, then this distinction between Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and Babylon already became a little bit of two types of Jews, the two types of Jews we're talking about. There's a beautiful expression in the Talmud that contrasts what is called Chassidei de Bavel, the Chassidim, or the devout Jews of Babylon. Chassidut has to do with love, with kindness, with softness, with being very forgiving. So Chassidei de Bavel, the Chassidim, the devout Jews of Babylon, they were very soft. They lived in Babylon. As opposed to some other rabbis who lived in Eretz Israel, and they were called Takifei Aradi Israel, the forceful of the land of Israel. So you had these two different types, right? Even before the time of the destruction of the second temple. This goes way back. There was this distinction. Outside of Israel, where you feel the exile in Babylon, you're soft, you're kind, you're forgiving. But if you live in the land of Israel, you have to be tougher. You have to have this takifut, this toughness, this forcefulness. Already then, we see the split. But we can even take it one step backwards, even further backwards. The two stages we talked about are two stages of the formation of the oral Torah, right? The Mishnah period in Babylon, and then you have the split between the tough of the land of Israel and the softer Jews of Babylon, and later on, the destruction of the second temple and the beginning of the Talmudic era. If we go even further back in history to the biblical time itself, biblical time, that's the written Torah, that's the time of the Jews who were fighting, who were forceful, who could wage wars, then is really where the split begins. It's a deep, deep inner split within what Judaism is all about, within the Jewish nation, within the Jewish story. The split is between Jacob and his twin brother Esau. Already the split was there. Jacob is described as he was growing up. He is described as Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim, an innocent dweller of tents. He is inside the tents. He is introverted. The tents, the sages say, are the tents of the Torah. He was learning Torah, the Torah that they had. Basically, he was meditating, was connecting to God. He was thinking about God. But he was an introvert. He was an innocent dweller of tents. But his twin brother was the opposite. His twin brother, who was not the father of Israel, he was a man of hunting, a man of the field. Ish tzayid, ish sadeh. And he was an extrovert. He was hunting, he was fighting on the outside. And this split, and here the Jew is the softer one of the two. This is where the story of the softer, more introverted, more submissive Jew is born. It's a very deep, profound aspect of what Judaism is all about.